So I'd like to bring up Erika and Garin Marshall.
A 42-year-old woman on the Upper West Side who has spent thousands of dollars to get pregnant in the first place goes to Maryland to terminate one twin at 29 weeks to save the life of the other. A mother in Mineola finds out her second baby has a condition that would translate to a constant vegetative state for their child if they carried to term. A young Muslim woman from Brooklyn finds out at 30 weeks that her baby's neurological issues are so severe she might never develop brain function beyond that of a 6-month-old child. So she flies to Colorado almost exactly a year after we did. These are a few of the dozens of women I've met over the past 18 months since I terminated a pregnancy at 32 weeks. While each story is unique, we've all ended very wanted pregnancies. We share a particular grief that places us in a rare kind of sisterhood. These are complicated decisions made with our doctors and families to mitigate suffering, always. And for those of us from New York, our grief was compounded by being made to feel like criminals.
The laws that we make say a lot about who we are. They codify our principles and our morality and hopefully our wisdom. But ultimately, our laws are products of our shared experiences, our stories. Something terrible happens, we tell each other, we all agree there should be a law governing it, and make sure it doesn't happen again. But if we never hear some of those stories, if they're stifled by shame and stigma, they never get woven into the DNA of our laws. The terrible thing just keeps happening over and over again. So every law has a why, right? Why do we need this law? Who does it affect? And the why is critical to getting people on board because people tend to make political decisions with their emotions, with their hearts, not their intellect. Look at 2016. The Reproductive Health Act allows for the lives of people, the circumstances of their pregnancy, to matter and to determine the course of their care. And these stories are why we need this bill.
When we first went to Albany and started to tell our story in the offices of senators opposing the RHA, a couple of things became clear to us fairly quickly. Even though these people empathized with our situation, they didn't grasp that this was an issue that was affecting patients across the state. And even if they personally wanted to help people like us, they felt they couldn't publicly support the RHA because there would be political ramifications with their party and with their constituents. So think about that for a second. We tell them our story, and everyone in the room agrees that there's a problem. But they say their constituents wouldn't understand. The implication then is that their constituents are dumber or less compassionate than they are. We obviously strongly disagree. We see this as an educational problem, not necessarily an ideological one. We believe that we have to reach out across the state so that our fellow citizens understand the need for this bill on a human level. And once New Yorkers understand the need, the why, we think they'll start pressing their politicians on this, asking how they are allowing these tragic situations to keep happening. We want to create a tipping point where our representatives will see it as a political liability not to support the RHA. Our small role in this is to tell you our story.
So this is our story. E and I met while working at a scrappy political theater in the city. We actually do have a theater background. We were friends for years before the timing was right, but once it was, it felt inevitable and kind of easy, actually. And once you find your person, you can't really imagine doing anything without them. But one night we were in bed watching TV and Erika started mumbling gibberish. And suddenly her face contorted and her body froze in a grotesque and painful position, and I was terrified. I frantically called an ambulance. They struggled to get an IV into her. It's really scary to see an FDNY paramedic look nervous. I'll say that. It was a full-blown seizure out of nowhere. And people just don't have seizures out of nowhere. And eventually, she would require brain surgery. But after that night, everything was different. And it felt like nothing would ever be taken for granted. Erika proposed to me soon after that. And we... Yeah. We got married, and eventually Erika peed on a plastic stick, and it said she was pregnant. And we were excited and hopeful. At 10 weeks, we went in for a routine ultrasound, and the OB was chatting away, and then she just stopped and said, "I'm sorry." There was no heartbeat. It felt like I got kicked in the stomach, and we were devastated.
So we cautiously entered into our next pregnancy. It's kind of like your second real romantic relationship. You enter into it hopeful, but your eyes are open this time, and the innocence is gone. And maybe that's why, as complications started to stack up, we remained hopeful. Reticent to give the baby a real name, we referred to him as Spartacus, our little fighter. A woman I know who leads our grief group talks about how pregnancies run on hope, that it's as essential as amniotic fluid, and maybe we had too much hope, pushing past all of these complications that, in hindsight, were signs of a doomed pregnancy. Ironically, the first definitive indication that this pregnancy was not viable was an excess of amniotic fluid. The baby couldn't swallow, which meant that the baby couldn't breathe. The doctor explained that if I carried the pregnancy to term, and if the baby made it that far, the baby would choke for breath and die in his only moments of life. I was 30 weeks pregnant and just finding that our pregnancy was not viable.
Now, New York didn't doom our pregnancy, but everything that happened after that moment is why we need the RHA. Instead of our doctors plotting a course of care that prioritized Erika's safety and health, they were talking about how to work around the New York state law. We had two options. We could continue the pregnancy, condemning Erika to carry it for another 10 weeks or so without hope, and ensure the baby would die choking for air. Or we could leave the state and pay a doctor we didn't know to terminate the pregnancy. That's the real outcome of the current law. But there's no political liability for that. No state senator has had to go home to a town hall to explain the choice we had to make to their constituents, yet.
Once we received that final diagnosis, we never hesitated. We didn't know what was involved, but we knew we were going to get a termination because to us, it felt like we were minimizing suffering. Our doctor recommended a clinic in Colorado with a doctor named Warren Hearn. Patients that he had sent there had had good outcomes and had gone on to have successful pregnancies afterward. The 3 clinics in the country that do this procedure for patients out of state don't take insurance because they don't get reimbursed. So you have to pay up front. For a procedure like mine, that late, it is usually $20,000 to $25,000. I actually know people who paid $30,000. We paid $10,000 because Dr. Hearn only felt comfortable performing part of the procedure in his clinic. So the brain surgery, it meant that I couldn't push. So he and my neurosurgeon and my OB in New York had to coordinate a plan that included me flying to Colorado, getting a shot to stop the baby's heart, and then fly back that same night to deliver in a hospital here in New York in case something went wrong with my head. The delivery itself took 30 hours.
We had always wanted to go to Colorado. We always liked traveling. It's kind of what we do for fun. We actually enjoy being in a cheap motel in a strange city, but this wasn't fun. First of all, Erika is, at this point, 32 weeks pregnant. If TSA stops you because you aren't supposed to fly that late in pregnancy, the clinic advises that you explain you're 6 months pregnant with twins. But then, because apparently pregnancy is some sort of public invitation for strangers to invade your personal space and ask you questions, everyone in the airport, in the rental car center, everyone wants to know when she's due. If we know the sex, if we have a name, if it's our first. And because it's a few days after Mother's Day, everyone wants to wish Erika a happy Mother's Day. Then there's the money. We were fortunate and could afford to drop everything, travel to Colorado, rent a car, rent a hotel room, and pay $10,000 for the procedure thanks to Erika's mom's retirement account. But many people in this state can't do any of that. Many people are just forced to carry that pregnancy.
But beyond the hardships, beyond the costs of the procedure and the travel, the cruelty of the current law is that it compounded our grief with shame. New York didn't create the stigma around abortion, but it sure as hell is perpetuating it. My good friend assumed I was doing something shady when I told him I had to go to Colorado and pay cash, as if I was getting some sketchy back alley procedure, and in a way, I was. It is literally outlawed. So the current law draws an arbitrary line in the sand. Before 24 weeks, it's kind of okay. After 24 weeks, it's criminal. You're wrong, you're indecent, you're unworthy of care. Your health doesn't matter, shame on you. The shame makes us whisper abortion in hushed tones or use a euphemism like lost the baby. But whether you terminate at 8 weeks or 28 weeks, whether you terminate because of your health or a fetal anomaly or because you don't want to be a parent or because it's none of our business, you had an abortion. I had an abortion at 32 weeks, and I should have been able to have my abortion a mile from my house, not 1,800 painful, expensive, shameful miles away.
So now you know us. You know our story, but we want to stress that we believe this bill can happen. People tend to think change happens slowly, linearly, maybe generation by generation as views on issues like this evolve slowly. But that's not actually true. Change happens quickly these days. Ideas, stories spread like a virus, each host infecting a handful of others. Look at the Me Too campaign, where stories are being shared and we're dragging a bunch of powerful sexual predators out into the light. Advocacy campaigns, like pregnancies, run on hope.
So use our story or someone else's. Use it to fuel your own advocacy for this bill, and use it to talk to your fellow New Yorkers about why we need the Reproductive Health Act. At the very least, why it deserves to be brought to the floor for a vote. I can't afford to be cynical. And the next woman, blissfully unaware that she's about to be forced to carry a doomed pregnancy by the state of New York, can't afford for you to be cynical either. Thank you.